Hello, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Losing Faith, Finding Spirit. Today I want to talk about purity culture. I'll probably do a little bit of a series on this because I have a lot to say about purity culture. But first I want to talk about kind of what it is, how it affects people long term, and kind of the ins and outs of why it's pretty dangerous for youth. And it creates a hotbed for domestic violence and domestic abuse. It creates a hotbed for just being completely out of touch with yourself, your physical being, your sexual desires, and who you are and what that means to you, and how it's just not great. Really not great. So let's get started with what purity culture is and my experiences with purity culture, which we've got stories. I've got stories. Purity culture is this concept that there's a very strong and heavy emphasis on remaining a virgin until marriage. Doesn't matter what your assigned gender is at birth, you must be a virgin until you say I do. And only then are you allowed to enjoy the pleasures of sex. So forget exploring your body. That is a no-no. You're not allowed to have desire. You're not allowed. Desire is not allowed. It is actually frowned upon. Abstinence is the only idea of what is like the sexual plan. Sex ed isn't allowed. You're not allowed to even know about the functions of your body. Because unless you are having intercourse to make babies or enjoying your marital bed, you shouldn't be doing anything, even thinking about it. I think Jesus said if you look on a person with lust, you're committing adultery with them in your mind. And so that concept kind of got blown up into this whole, and into entire culture, into an entire just thing. There's conferences, there's series, there's books, there's ceremonies, all kinds of stuff. I remember we did like an overnight retreat about purity culture, and we had part of that retreat was that we got a purity ring that you wore on your ring finger, like your actual ring finger, to symbolize that you won't take that off until you get engaged and you won't have sex. And if you have sex, you have to remove the ring from your finger and show the shame that you broke your promise, your purity promise. Some evangelical churches and other places have ceremonies where the dad is the one who gives the daughter the ring, and she's like engaged to him as a promise of her purity until the person comes to ask for her hand in marriage. Then he will take it off as part of the ceremony. It's gross. That's just gross. It's so gross. It grosses me out just thinking about it. That was not my experience, thank God. I would not accept a ring from my dad. That's yuck. Gross. But I did. I did go with my best friend in high school. We picked out rings for each other. We picked out our purity rings. And guys, I am going to admit to you right now, as you heard it in my voice and how I said that, pretty sure my best friend in high school and I were like a lesbian couple without the physical intimacy and the excitement of actually being a lesbian couple. I know now, as a grown adult and 20-something years later, I was in love with her. She might have been in love with me. We were pretty much a couple. But we were both Christians, and that's, again, this is part of why I'm doing this series. Purity culture doesn't allow for any kind of homosexuality or queerness, or even anything that like is outside of the heteronormative perspective. Well, so unfortunately, I did not get to reap the benefits of having a romantic relationship with my best friend, who I was very much in love with in high school, and I couldn't even acknowledge those feelings of love for her that I actually truly had until much later, and until almost recently. I mean, we're talking 20 plus years, almost 30 years. It's a shame. That's something I would have loved to have actually explored back then and found out more. My whole life would be very different. I'd be a very different person if I had not had the pressure of this purity culture and this shame and this heteronormativeness just forced upon me. And so that's why I'm talking about it now, so that other people don't feel that way. So purity culture focuses on victim blaming as well. That's another aspect of it, because as a assigned female at birth, myself, it is the female responsibility to keep everything pure. There was emphasis on assigned males at birth as well to stay pure and not have sex, but they didn't go through the same stuff that we did, and I can't speak to that experience because that wasn't my experience. So fortunately, if you are someone who came from the purity culture background and you were assigned male at birth, I can't speak to your experience because that wasn't my experience. And I don't know how bad you guys had it, and if you had it bad. To me, though, I can speak to the assigned female at birth. We were told that maintaining the virginity was our responsibility, and I'll tell you why. We were taught that all men only cares about sex. That's it. They only want to be with you for sex. So in order to prove that they're worthy of your virginity, you have to make them wait until marriage. Like, you have to make them wait and commit to you and marry you. And that is the true, love. That's how they prove it, all of that nonsense. And if something happens to you, it's your fault. How you dress, how you behave. There was a very heavy emphasis on that, on the way that you dress, the way that you behave, the way that you talk and flirt. Like, you have to be very mindful of every interaction you have with a boy, because it could lead to sex, and sex leads to STIs, STDs, that sex leads to pregnancy, sex leads to shame. You're no longer the beautiful white bride of Christ. You don't represent the church anymore. And that's the other thing too, because the Bible is full of these metaphors of the church being the bride of Christ. The emphasis in purity culture is on brides. It's on the assigned female at birth, and on this whole idea that you have to be the perfect woman. I mean, that whole Proverbs 40 or 30, whatever that is, about the perfect woman, that was such a heavy indoctrination that I grew up in. And it's like a standard that nobody can live to. Nobody lived to. And the people talking to us didn't live to that. One of the people who was talking to us during that little conference I was talking about had sex outside of marriage. And she was talking about how bad it was, and how, as a grown woman who's been married to the same person for how many years and has daughters and is successful, she's trying to tell us that, because we had sex before marriage, or because our honeymoon was this way and that way, it took away from the romance. And it's like, well, is that still a problem? Do you guys still have problems in the bed? What? I don't understand. It's creepy. Also, that's just the emphasis on sex. I feel like you are not going to find anyone thirstier than the people going to an evangelical Christian church. They are thirsty. Thirsty. And you want to know why I know this? Because at the bridal showers, we never had a bridal shower at the church. It was lingerie showers. I didn't know that there was a difference between bachelorette party and bridal shower. And bridal showers where you're supposed to get all your cooking stuff and home stuff. We never had those at our church. It was always lingerie parties. And they had all these crazy games and all these these women were thirsty. These women want, this was the only time it was acceptable to kind of talk about sex and so the adults, and I was a small child going to these parties and seeing all these lingerie and hearing them talk about sex and stuff. and not really understanding what they were talking about. That's the only time it was acceptable for the women to really kind of let loose and enjoy and talk about the enjoyment of sex. But it's super awkward when you're a virgin and this is your birth, like this is like all these old ladies that you have to deal with Sunday morning. The lady that taught you in your Sunday school church like class is whipping out like a teddy and joking about what you're going to do on your night. And it's gross. It's gross. Gross. But it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be gross. It should be fun. It should be lighthearted. It shouldn't be this like thing that's like only on a certain day, only on a certain night. And it should be something that's celebrated. Women's desire, male's desire, sexual desire should be celebrated. And it's not. And I know that's part of like more than just purity culture. I think that's a whole big thing in this Western civilization, mostly because the Puritans kind of came over and established what is now kind of our culture. And desire of the worldly flesh is something that Puritans were and Quakers were not about. So unfortunately, we're heavily sexualized in America. And like it's super awkward. And I remember the point where my father started treating me differently. I probably was 9. I had developed breasts and was wearing a bra and other things. I developed early. And like I started being treated differently by the adults, by the male adults in my life. And it was uncomfortable. It made me feel very uncomfortable. I got catcalled in the streets at like 9, 10 years old. Wasn't even a teenager, and these gross men are sitting there whistling at me and calling me names and stuff. And you ignore it, you tune it out, but it's disgusting. I'm a 10-year-old. Like, gross. Pedophilia. But purity culture says it's your fault. So if I get catcalled, I'm thinking, what am I wearing? I need to not wear this again. You know, that mindset. So then I internalize the blame because again, I had already been internalizing the blame from my mother for my childhood traumas, feeling responsible for all of the emotional stuff in my family. So I internalized the blame. So when I was sexually assaulted twice in high school, 2 different people, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't do anything about it because it was my fault. I was wearing a skirt. My fault. Shouldn't have wore a skirt that was above the knees, even though it was the dress code for a thing that I was going to. Like it was part of the uniform that I had to wear that day. I shouldn't have worn a skirt. Shouldn't have done it. I shouldn't have flirted with this guy. Shouldn't have flirted with him for how many months. I shouldn't have kissed him beforehand. He got handsy and I couldn't say no because he was pressing his mouth against my mouth, even though I was pushing him away. He's too strong. Okay. That's it. I have big feelings about that. I also internalized a message, like purity culture. So it's telling you that you flirt, you're bringing it on. You wear your clothes, you bring it on. You exist. Your existence makes men want you sexually. So if you're sexually assaulted and you don't get to say no, it's your fault. I internalized that. That's the message that I came away with in purity culture. So when I was assaulted twice, I genuinely internalized that as my fault. And unfortunately, that led to a very low standard for consent later on in my life. So when I met my ex-husband and we dated in college, the fact that he would ask if he could do things made me feel like I could relax and let him do things. Sometimes he'd ask after he did stuff, like, is this okay? Are you okay with me doing this? And I wasn't, but I didn't know how to say that because I had internalized from purity culture that if it's your fault if they do stuff, and I was already feeling kind of dirty, because already things had happened, and this is a person that I genuinely cared about, and I kind of interpreted if you love someone, you let them. Does that make sense? And I don't know if that's from purity culture or just an overall American idea, but I had genuinely internalized the thought that I don't want to lose this person. I think that's more for the complex trauma I'm gonna be, because that desire to be loved, that need to be loved and treasured was so strong that I was afraid that if I said no, I would lose this person's affection. And I needed that person's affection. Like I needed it. I needed it more than I needed anything else. Of course, again, because the purity culture mindset doesn't allow for variances from heteronormative relationships or cisgenders, it took many years, and after I was already married for a couple of years, for me to realize that I had an attraction to women, to the same sex, I was queer. I believed for a long time that I was bi, but I think I'm closer to pan, closer to demi. I just queer. And queerness is not allowed in the church. You're going straight to hell, burning forever. So that was something that I was too afraid to admit to myself while I was within the church. So leaving the church, leaving behind the doctrines, getting away from all of that brainwashing, getting away from purity culture, being married and having unfulfilled sex for a while, made me feel like I could finally relax and explore myself. And made me be able to finally admit to myself what I truly was. And I didn't really want to do anything about it because I was married, and I thought, well, I'm bi anyways, I must be fine with it. But no, it was not okay. And even into the marriage, and there was some very uncomfortable sexual moments. And I won't get too deep into that. I don't want to be too graphic. But there were times where, after having relations with my ex, I felt really uncomfortable afterwards, and I couldn't pinpoint why. There were times where he would drink a lot and be more aggressive and do some things, and later, months and months, and sometimes years, he'd be like, did I do something bad to you when I did that? When I was drunk that one time? And the fact that he even had to ask that terrified me. I'm like, one, you don't even remember what you did. So eventually I put a boundary and I said, I'm not having relations with you if you drink. And that led to us having relations once a month, maybe twice a month, because he drank all the time. I didn't even think about it at the time. I was so desperate, again, so desperate to be loved, that you put up with so much. And once you're married, the purity culture kind of turns into this whole, like, the wife's responsibility is the emotional marriage, like the union, all of that's your responsibility. And if your husband cheats on you or like starts looking for greener pasture, you need to work on yourself. It's your responsibility as the wife to keep yourself pretty, to keep yourself young looking, to give in. That's the other thing. So like, I remember, I don't know if it was my mom or one of the church ladies, but there was a message that, and I don't know if it was directly said, like in words, or if it was kind of like subtext, but the message I remember internalizing is that you have sex with your spouse whenever they want it. You do not say no, because if you start saying no, they'll go elsewhere. So when those things and those uncomfortable things started happening with my ex and during sex and during those intimate moments, I rationalized that I have to do these things because I'm going to lose him. If I don't do these things, he's going to cheat on me. If I don't accept some things. So it wasn't ever about me. Being with a person was never about my desires. It was never about what I wanted out of sex, what I desire. It was always about the other party. And it was always out of fear. There's so much fear in my whole life. So that is my intro to purity culture, and kind of how it just overall damages. It's so damaging to put this emphasis on virginity and to tell someone not to explore their desires. It's so limiting, even for heteronormative couples, even for those who are within the church and who are trying to do it right. If you don't know what you like, that's so, I mean, like, yes, I am all for exploring things together, learning together, but like, you need to know yourself, and it's awkward to say no in the moment. It's awkward, but you need to, it's important. Ugh, gross. And knowing what you know, like yourself before going into it is very powerful, because you already know, and it's easier to say no because you're like, no, I know I don't like that. Don't touch me there. No, I know I don't like that. Don't go there. You know, like that. That's so important. Is then you're more fulfilled. You're having more intimacy. You're communicating. It's fun. Thank you for listening. I hope this helps you if you've struggled with, just if you've struggled with purity culture and those things that kind of those internalized false beliefs. I hope this helps you break them. I hope it helps you explore what desire means to you. And sometimes it's okay if you don't have desires. You don't have to be with people. Thank you for tuning in, and look forward to more in the future. Bye-bye.